This story is titled, My Wife Coldly Filed for Divorce Planning. To take my entire fortune, I simply said okay. But her world shattered in court when she realized the prenup she signed. Gave me almost everything. Sup Reddit, my name is Derek, and I'm 39 years old. Just last week, I finalized what might be the most satisfying divorce in legal history. I'm still riding the high of witnessing what could only be described as the most perfect karma I've ever seen unfold in real life. Now, some of you might think I'm an asshole by the end of this story, but I honestly don't give a single fuck about that judgment. Sometimes protecting yourself and everything you've worked for means being absolutely ruthless. And I've got zero regrets about how this entire situation played out. Let me set the stage properly here, because understanding the money involved is crucial to appreciating just how this story hits different from your typical divorce drama. I own a construction company that I started from absolutely nothing 14 years ago. When I say nothing, I mean I literally started with one beat-up pickup truck that had more rust than paint and more ambition than common sense. Those early days were brutal. I was taking on small residential jobs for local homeowners, sleeping in that truck more nights than I slept in my apartment because I couldn't afford gas money to drive home after long days on job sites. Fast forward to today, and I've built something I'm genuinely proud of. We now have 52 trucks in our fleet, 2 main offices that handle operations across the region, and exclusive contracts with 3 of the biggest developers in the state. We're talking serious money annually after a good year. And let me tell you, the last 4 years have been very, very good to us. The transformation from that broke kid sleeping in a pickup truck to running a multi-million-dollar operation still feels surreal sometimes. This success story is important context because it explains exactly what I had to lose, and exactly what certain people thought they could take from me. When you've built an empire from nothing, you tend to be pretty protective of it. You also tend to attract a certain type of person who sees dollar signs instead of the human being behind them. I met Victoria at a beach party back in 2011 when I was 27 years old. This was right after I had just landed my first major contract with a national development firm, a deal that would change the trajectory of my entire business. My buddy Ryan had dragged me to this incredibly bougie resort event, and I was uncomfortable as hell from the moment we walked through the gates. I'm much more at home around construction sites and equipment yards than I am around infinity pools and cabanas filled with people who've never worked a real day in their lives. But Ryan kept insisting that I needed to network more and actually live a little, so I reluctantly agreed to go. That's when I saw her, and everything changed in an instant. Picture every Instagram model you've ever scrolled past at 2 a.m. when you couldn't sleep. That was Victoria. She had this blonde hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold, though I found out later it was actually $450 worth of extensions that she got touched up every 6 weeks. Her tan looked like she'd been dipped in honey by some kind of goddess. But that was really just the result of spray tan sessions twice weekly at some high-end salon. And her body seemed to defy gravity in ways that mocked the basic laws of physics. Those particular assets ended up costing me $13,500 2 years later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. She was working as a cocktail waitress at the resort, but the way she carried herself made you think she was one of the wealthy guests staying there. I was hooked immediately, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. When a woman who looks like that focuses her attention on you like you're the only man at the entire party, your brain doesn't stand a chance against that kind of focused charm. She zeroed in on me like a predator who had spotted wounded prey from across the savannah. I found out later from her friend that she had actually asked the bartender who owned the new Range Rover in the parking lot before she ever approached me. When she discovered it belonged to me, suddenly I had a personal waitress who kept bringing me drinks I hadn't ordered, and conversation I definitely hadn't paid for. She had this laugh that made you want to be funnier just to hear it again. And she'd touch my arm whenever I said something even remotely amusing. She would lean in close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixing with the ocean breeze coming off the beach. Victoria told me how refreshing it was to finally meet a guy who actually worked for a living, someone who had built something with his own hands. She claimed she was so tired of all these trust fund babies who had never earned anything themselves and didn't understand the value of real work. Looking back now with perfect hindsight, I can see the calculated precision in every single move she made that night. The way she would casually mention how hard it was making ends meet on a waitress salary, then immediately change the subject like she was embarrassed about her financial struggles. How she would admiringly run her fingers over my watch, then follow it up by talking about how material things didn't really matter to her anyway. The way she made me feel like an absolute king while simultaneously planting seeds about all the things she deserved but couldn't afford on her current income was nothing short of masterful manipulation. We started dating shortly after that beach party, and Victoria was working 3 shifts a week at the resort while claiming she was also running a fashion consulting business on the side. What that business actually meant was that she had an Instagram page where she posted pictures of herself wearing different outfits that various brands had sent her for free in exchange for exposure to her modest following. But 27-year-old me thought that was entrepreneurial as hell. I saw it as her building her personal brand, hustling to make connections, and working multiple angles to create opportunities for herself. God, I was so incredibly stupid back then. 4 months into our relationship, Victoria suddenly lost her apartment in what seemed like a crisis that came out of nowhere. Her roommate had supposedly bailed on their lease without any warning, leaving Victoria unable to afford the rent on her own. She showed up at my place one evening with tears streaming down her face and 2 large suitcases in tow, telling me through her sobs that she might have to move back to Nevada to live with her mom. She made it sound like this would probably mean goodbye for us, since long-distance relationships never work out and she couldn't ask me to wait for her while she got back on her feet. Captain Save-A-Ho here immediately offered to let her move in with me without even thinking it through. She did this whole elaborate song and dance about how she couldn't possibly impose on me like that, how it was way too much to ask of someone she'd only been dating for 4 months, and how she would never want to be a burden. But somehow, her stuff was completely unpacked and settled into my closet within the hour of that conversation ending. Here's the thing about Victoria that I didn't understand until much, much later in our relationship. She was an absolute professional at what she did. Her real job wasn't cocktail waitressing or fashion consulting or any of the things she claimed to do for work. Her actual full-time career was making me feel like the most important, successful, and desirable man in the entire world, while slowly and systematically draining my bank account dry. And she was absolutely incredible at it too. Every single day when I came home from work, no matter how late I was running, there would be a perfectly prepared dinner waiting for me on the table. She would give me back rubs without me even asking after particularly long and stressful days on job sites. The sex was the kind that made me forget my own name, and thank God for the privilege of being alive to experience it. She played the role of the perfect, supportive girlfriend like she had been studying for the part her entire life, and her performance was absolutely flawless. But the mask started slipping gradually, revealing little things that seemed like nothing at the time, but make perfect sense now that I understand what was really happening. Like when I bought her a $2,200 Chanel purse for her birthday, a gift I thought would show her how much I cared about her. And her very first response was asking if they had the same bag available in a different color, or how she would consistently order the most expensive item on the menu whenever we went out to restaurants. Then take maybe 3 bites before claiming she was completely full and couldn't eat another bite. I started noticing the way she would casually mention things that her friends' boyfriends had bought for them, never directly asking me for anything specific, but painting a very clear picture of the expectations and standards I should be meeting if I really cared about her the way I claimed to. My lawyer buddy Connor tried to warn me about 7 months into the relationship, and I should have listened to every single word he said. We were sitting at lunch discussing a contract dispute I was dealing with at work, when out of nowhere he went straight for the jugular about Victoria. He told me that his girlfriend had been at that same beach party where Victoria and I had met, and she had witnessed Victoria Googling my name and researching my net worth on her phone before she ever brought me that first drink. I defended Victoria like a complete idiot, telling Connor that she was just being smart and doing her research, showing genuine interest in my success and what I had built. I actually tried to convince him that it demonstrated she was attracted to ambitious, successful men rather than just looking for a free ride. Connor just shook his head with this look of complete exasperation and told me that when I inevitably proposed, because he knew I would, since I was clearly thinking with my dick instead of my brain, I better get an ironclad prenuptial agreement. 9 months into our relationship, I found myself ring shopping. But not because I had made any kind of rational decision about our future together. Victoria had been leaving her laptop open to very specific ring pages on jewelry websites. Subtle stuff like a $92,000 cushion-cut diamond with a platinum band that was bookmarked as perfect ring in her browser favorites. The jeweler at the high-end store actually pulled me aside during my visit and asked if I was absolutely sure about making such a significant purchase. That conversation should have been my wake-up call, but I was already too far gone to think clearly. I proposed on a beach in the Bahamas because of course I did. It seemed like the romantic, grand gesture that someone like Victoria deserved. I even flew her entire family out there to witness the moment, because she had mentioned multiple times how meaningful it would be to have them there to witness our commitment to each other. Her mother Patricia, her sister Nicole, and a couple of cousins I had never even heard of before that trip all got first-class flights and luxury accommodations. I probably dropped around $55,000 on the entire production between the flights, the resort, and the elaborate dinner celebration afterwards. Victoria said yes before I even got the full question out of my mouth, practically snatching that ring off the velvet cushion like it might disappear if she waited another second. That night, Connor texted me just 2 words that probably saved my financial life. Prenup tomorrow. You see, Connor had watched his older brother go from owning 3 successful restaurants to living in a studio apartment and driving for Uber after his divorce completely destroyed him. His ex-wife had taken him for absolutely everything, including the restaurant locations he had spent years building up from nothing. After witnessing that devastation firsthand, Connor had made it his personal mission to save every friend he could from suffering the same fate. I'll be grateful to him until the day I die for that intervention. The next morning, while we were sitting on the balcony of our suite watching the sunrise over the crystal clear water, I brought up the subject of the prenuptial agreement. Victoria was admiring how the early morning light hit her new ring, tilting her hand at different angles, probably calculating its resale value in her head. I casually mentioned that Connor was going to draw up some paperwork to protect the business and keep things clean for the company, making sure my employees would be protected no matter what happened to us personally in the future. The transformation was instant and absolutely terrifying. It was like watching a nature documentary where you think you're looking at some cute, harmless animal, and then it suddenly reveals that it's actually an apex predator. The ring admiration stopped immediately. Her entire body went rigid like she had been struck by lightning. She turned to look at me with eyes that could have frozen molten lava, and she went from using her sweet, breathy baby voice to sounding like a completely different person altogether. She asked if I was seriously bringing up our potential divorce the day after proposing to her. For 4 days in what should have been paradise, we went to absolute war over that prenuptial agreement. Victoria tried every single manipulation tactic in the book, cycling through them like she was reading from some kind of psychological warfare manual. She deployed tears that would start and stop like she had an internal switch she could flip on command. We had screaming matches so loud and volatile that other hotel guests were complaining to the front desk about the noise coming from our suite. She gave me the silent treatment, walking past me like I was completely invisible and didn't exist in her world anymore. She even attempted to seduce me out of signing the prenup, showing up in the most expensive lingerie I had ever bought her, talking in sultry whispers about how we didn't need legal papers between us when we had real love binding us together. Every approach was calculated and deliberate, designed to break down my resolve and get me to abandon the idea entirely. Her mother Patricia got involved in the fight, calling me every name in the book and unleashing a verbal assault that would have made a sailor blush. She told me I was treating her precious daughter like a prostitute, and that real men don't need prenuptial agreements because real men honor their commitments and don't plan for failure. Her sister Nicole started posting passive-aggressive memes on Facebook about knowing your worth and recognizing red flags in relationships that were obviously directed at me. Even the cousins I had generously flown out there for the proposal suddenly had very strong opinions about how I was probably planning to cheat on Victoria and wanted an easy exit strategy prepared in advance. But I held firm through all of it, partly because Connor was texting me every single hour, reminding me not to cave under the pressure, and partly because some primitive, survival-oriented part of my brain recognized this extreme reaction as a massive red flag. If we were really going to be together forever, like Victoria claimed we would be, then the prenup wouldn't matter at all. It would just be a piece of paper sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere, never to be seen or thought about again. The only logical reason to fight a prenup this hard was if she was already planning her exit strategy and wanted to maximize her payout when that day came. Finally, after 4 days of psychological warfare, Victoria agreed to sign the prenup, but only if I made some significant concessions to the terms. We flew back home and immediately met with our respective lawyers to hammer out the details. Her attorney cost me $3,800 in legal fees because, of course, I ended up paying for her representation too. I couldn't have her claiming later that she didn't have adequate legal counsel when she signed the agreement. The prenup ended up being more generous than Connor had originally wanted it to be, but it was still completely bulletproof from a legal standpoint. The terms were straightforward. If Victoria initiated divorce proceedings without legitimate cause like infidelity or abuse on my part, I would retain 85% of all marital assets and maintain complete control of all business interests. She would receive 15% of any marital assets that had been accumulated during our marriage, plus all of her personal belongings. There would be no alimony payments if she was the one who initiated the divorce. However, if I was the one who initiated divorce proceedings without cause, it would be a standard 50-50th split of all assets. Her lawyer actually told her privately that the agreement was more than fair for someone who was bringing no assets whatsoever to the marriage. Victoria signed that prenup with all the enthusiasm you'd expect from someone signing their own death warrant. Her mother sat in the corner of the law office muttering under her breath about how prenups get thrown out by judges all the time, how courts don't honor them anymore, and how I would regret this decision when Victoria found herself a better lawyer someday. That conversation should have been my final cue to run as fast as possible in the opposite direction. But the wedding was already planned. Deposits had been paid to vendors, and I was still completely convinced that I was in love with this woman. The first year of marriage was actually decent, at least on the surface. Victoria quit her cocktail waitressing job immediately after our wedding, explaining that it would be embarrassing for a successful company owner's wife to be serving drinks to people we might encounter in our social circles. I didn't fight her on this decision because, honestly, I kind of agreed with her reasoning. It did seem beneath her new station in life. She threw herself completely into being a housewife with the same intensity she had brought to everything else. Victoria learned to cook by watching YouTube channels for hours each day, gradually mastering elaborate recipes that turned our dinner table into something resembling a high-end restaurant. She kept our home looking like something straight out of Architectural Digest magazine, with fresh flowers arranged perfectly and every surface spotless. When I came home from long days at construction sites, she always looked absolutely perfect, hair professionally styled, makeup applied flawlessly, wearing something that showed just enough skin to remind me exactly why I had married her in the first place. But as my business continued to grow and the money started flowing in larger amounts, Victoria's appetite for luxury became completely insatiable. It started small and escalated systematically, like a carefully planned campaign. During year one, she suddenly needed a new car because her Honda Civic was embarrassing when she pulled up to the country club she had joined without discussing it with me first. I bought her a BMW X5, thinking that would satisfy her transportation needs for years to come. Year two brought the personal trainer requirement. Victoria explained that all the other executive wives had personal trainers, and didn't I want her to look good for me and represent our success properly? That decision cost me $425 per session, 5 days a week, which added up to over $2,000 weekly just for her to stay in shape. Year three was when she declared she needed a complete wardrobe overhaul because she needed to dress like the wife of a successful businessman, not like some college girl who shopped at department stores. Every single request was carefully framed as being for my benefit, for our image as a power couple, or for the success of my business. Victoria would spend hours researching exactly how much other executives' wives spent on their appearance and lifestyle, then present her findings to me like a detailed business proposal. The genius of her approach was making me feel cheap and unsupportive if I said no to any of her requests. She made it seem like I was holding her back from being the partner I deserved to have by my side. By year 6 of our marriage, Victoria was completely unrecognizable from the cocktail waitress I had met at that beach party. She had monthly Botox appointments to maintain her flawless complexion, quarterly filler injections to keep her lips and cheeks looking perfectly sculpted, and hair extensions that cost more than most people pay in rent each month. Her nails were professionally done every single week. She maintained a perfect spray tan year-round, and she had invested in veneered teeth that created a blindingly white smile. Victoria also employed a nutritionist who planned every meal she ate, a style consultant who helped her choose outfits for different occasions, and a life coach who supposedly helped her maintain the mental clarity needed to be an executive's wife. She looked like she had been assembled in some kind of factory that specialized in building trophy wives to exact specifications. The total monthly maintenance cost for my wife exceeded what I paid 3 of my most experienced drivers combined. Her daily routine had evolved into what could only be described as a parody of wealthy housewife life. At 10 a.m., she had Pilates sessions with her personal trainer. At noon, she would meet the girls for brunch, where they spent hours discussing their husband's various inadequacies and shortcomings. By 2 p.m., she was shopping at high-end boutiques, where dropping $32,000 on a casual Tuesday was considered completely normal behavior. At 4 p.m., she required spa treatments because shopping was apparently exhausting work. Then she would spend from 6 p.m. until whenever getting ready for whatever evening social event she had committed us to without bothering to ask my opinion or check my schedule. Victoria started a lifestyle blog called Living Lux with Victoria that posted maybe 4 times a year if we were lucky. But she had professional business cards printed calling herself the CEO and founder of her digital empire. She would spend countless hours staging elaborate photos of herself with products she had purchased using my money, writing pretentious captions about curating a life of intentional luxury and elevating everyday moments into experiences. The irony of calling yourself an entrepreneur when your entire business model revolves around spending someone else's money was completely lost on her. But she embraced the role with conviction. Her friend group had evolved into what could only be described as a coven of gold diggers, led by this absolutely toxic creature named Brittany, who was married to some pharmaceutical executive. These women would get together regularly and literally compare notes on extraction techniques like they were studying for some kind of advanced course in financial manipulation. I would overhear conversations that made my skin crawl, with detailed discussions about training their husbands like dogs, withholding sex strategically to secure better gifts, and planning elaborate exit strategies designed for maximum profit when their marriages inevitably ended. They had developed a whole specialized vocabulary for their activities too, referring to their husbands as investors rather than partners, and talking about divorce as cashing out, like they were discussing stock options. These women treated marriage like a business venture, where the goal was to extract as much value as possible before moving on to the next opportunity. Brittany was without question the worst possible influence Victoria could have had in her life. She was constantly filling Victoria's head with poison about how she deserved so much more than what she was getting, how she was settling for less than her true worth, and how her beauty was a depreciating asset that she needed to maximize before it faded with age. Brittany had somehow convinced Victoria that being a trophy wife was actually harder work than having a real job, because you had to be on all the time, constantly managing your appearance like it was a brand, and navigating the complex social dynamics that came with wealth and status. Meanwhile, I was working 75-hour weeks building what had become a legitimate empire, while Victoria was strategizing about which charity board would give her the most social capital for the least amount of actual work or commitment. But I continued to ignore all the warning signs that were flashing like neon lights in front of my face, mainly because the sex was still incredible. The house ran smoothly without my involvement, and having such a beautiful wife on my arm at business events definitely didn't hurt my professional image. Last year, however, things started getting weird in ways that I couldn't ignore or explain away. It began with small inconsistencies in Victoria's stories that didn't add up when I actually paid attention to the details. She would tell me she was spending the weekend at her mother's house, but then her mom would call our landline, asking if we had seen Victoria lately. I started noticing charges on our credit cards for airline tickets when she was supposedly driving somewhere within the state. There were restaurant bills for 2 people showing up on our statements when she claimed she had been eating alone. My gut was telling me that she was probably cheating on me, but something felt fundamentally off about that theory too. The pieces didn't quite fit together in the way they should have if she was simply having an affair. So I made the decision to hire a private investigator to find out what my wife was actually doing with her time. I hired a former police detective named Thompson, who came highly recommended from a client who had gone through a particularly ugly and contentious divorce. I told Thompson that I just needed to know what Victoria was doing during her days, because something wasn't adding up in her stories, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was wrong. That investigation ended up being the best $11,000 I have ever spent in my entire life. 2 weeks later, Thompson called me with an urgency in his voice that made my stomach drop, saying we needed to meet immediately and that I should bring my lawyer with me. I was expecting him to tell me he had found evidence of a traditional affair, which would have been devastating enough. The reality of what he had uncovered was simultaneously so much worse and so much better than anything I could have imagined. Thompson had assembled a thick folder of evidence that was laid out like a prosecutor preparing for the trial of the century. Bank statements, surveillance photos, text message transcripts, receipts. He had documented a whole parallel life that Victoria had been living right under my nose. But she wasn't cheating in the conventional sense that I had suspected. What she was actually doing was something far more calculated and methodical than a simple affair. For over a year, Victoria had been systematically preparing her exit strategy from our marriage with the precision of a military operation. She had opened multiple bank accounts under her maiden name at different financial institutions across the city, carefully structuring her deposits to avoid federal reporting requirements that would have triggered automatic notifications. She had been siphoning money out of our joint accounts through dozens of different methods, each one small enough to avoid detection, but adding up to substantial amounts over time. Some of her techniques were almost impressively creative. She would get cash back at grocery stores and pocket the money instead of using it for household expenses. She was buying expensive items with our credit cards, then returning them for cash refunds that went directly into her secret accounts. Victoria had been systematically selling jewelry that I had bought her over the years and keeping all the proceeds for herself. She was even skimming money from the cash I would give her for tips and incidental expenses, claiming she needed more than she actually spent and keeping the difference. But the real shock that left me completely speechless was discovering the downtown condo. Victoria had rented a fully furnished luxury apartment under her maiden name, paying for it entirely with the money she had been stealing from me. In her text messages to Brittany, she referred to it as her single girl pad and discussed in detail how she was decorating it for her new life after she cashed out from our marriage. Thompson had documented how she had been moving clothes and personal belongings to this secret apartment slowly over many months, building a complete separate existence while sleeping next to me every single night and playing the role of devoted wife. The text message conversations between Victoria and Brittany made me physically sick to read. They discussed strategies for timing the divorce to achieve maximum financial benefit, techniques for hiding assets from discovery, and extensive research into which lawyers in the city were most successful at breaking prenuptial agreements. The most disturbing part was discovering that Brittany was doing exactly the same thing to her own husband. They were like divorce twins, coordinating their strategies and sharing tips about how they would soon be living their best lives as wealthy divorcees funded entirely by their ex-husband's money. Connor examined all the evidence with the experienced eye of a lawyer who had seen every kind of marital deception imaginable. His legal assessment was both brutal and beautiful at the same time. This wasn't simply marital discord or disagreement about asset division. What Victoria had been doing constituted theft, fraud, and systematic financial abuse. Even better for my situation, the prenuptial agreement contained specific clauses about financial malfeasance that would trigger complete forfeiture of all marital assets if she was caught engaging in this type of behavior. She had essentially been building an ironclad legal case against herself for over a year, documenting her own crimes while thinking she was being clever and getting away with something. The smart play, according to Connor, was to wait and let Victoria hang herself even further with additional evidence of her criminal behavior. So for 7 long months, I played completely dumb while meticulously documenting every single thing she did. I kept funding her extravagant lifestyle without showing any signs that I knew what was really happening behind the scenes. I kept smiling and acting like the loving husband when she would kiss me goodbye before leaving for her girls' trips that were really just opportunities for her to set up more aspects of her new post-divorce life. Every receipt, every lie, every stolen penny went into an ever-expanding file that grew thicker by the day. Thompson continued his surveillance, and Connor made sure every piece of evidence was properly documented and legally admissible. We were building a case that would be absolutely impossible for any lawyer to defend against. The hardest part of this entire ordeal was acting completely normal while knowing exactly what I knew about Victoria's betrayal. I had to listen to her complain about feeling trapped and suffocated in our marriage, while she was literally furnishing an escape condo with money she had stolen from me. I had to hear her tell friends on the phone about how controlling I was with our finances, while she was stealing from me on a daily basis, and I was pretending not to notice. I had to watch her play the victim in conversations about our relationship while she was actively victimizing me with surgical precision and calculated malice. Every single day was a performance where I had to pretend I didn't know that my wife was systematically destroying our marriage while planning to financially devastate me in the process. But I kept my mouth shut and played my role because I knew that patience would ultimately pay off in ways that Victoria couldn't even imagine. 4 weeks ago was the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, one of those $1,000-a-plate affairs where wealthy people compete to see who can be most publicly generous with their donations. Victoria absolutely loved these events because they gave her the perfect opportunity to peacock around in whatever designer creation she had purchased that week with my money. This particular evening, she was wearing a $48,000 Vera Wang gown that she had assured me was an investment because she could wear it to multiple high-profile events throughout the year. She was also dripping in diamonds that night, probably around $220,000 worth of jewelry adorning her body, every single piece representing my money that had been transformed into her armor of wealth and status. The champagne was flowing freely throughout the evening, though Victoria had switched to wine after her third glass because she had learned from past experience that too much champagne made her prone to causing scenes that embarrassed us both. She kept shooting me these strange looks across our table throughout the dinner. This weird combination of contempt and excitement that I had never seen on her face before. Then, without any warning whatsoever, she stood up and started tapping her wedding ring against her wine glass like she was about to give some kind of toast. The conversation at our table died immediately as everyone turned to look at her with curiosity. Other tables in our immediate vicinity noticed the gesture and began quieting down as well, probably expecting to hear some heartfelt speech about charitable giving or expressing gratitude for our blessed life together. Instead, Victoria dropped a nuclear bomb on my life with a smile on her face that I will never forget. She announced to approximately 60 people in our immediate vicinity that we were getting divorced, but she didn't just make a simple announcement. She performed an entire monologue about finally being free to live her authentic life, about escaping what she called emotional imprisonment, and about claiming her independence from what she described as an oppressive marriage. She actually used air quotes around the word marriage while delivering this speech, and she actually laughed out loud, while delivering this devastating public humiliation. Brittany immediately started slow clapping like this was some kind of feminist breakthrough moment that deserved applause. The other wives at our table looked like they had swallowed something extremely sour and unpleasant. The men just stared at their dinner plates, except for Kevin, Brittany's husband, who kept shooting me sympathetic looks across the table. One of my business associates was so uncomfortable with the situation that he actually got up and left the event rather than deal with the awkwardness of the moment. I sat there calm as a Hindu cow throughout her entire performance, completely unruffled by the public spectacle she was creating. I took a slow sip of my water, stood up from my chair with deliberate composure, and placed my hand gently on her back like any supportive husband would do. I looked her directly in the eyes and said, loud enough for everyone in our vicinity to hear clearly, that whatever made her happy was perfectly fine with me, and that I wanted nothing but the absolute best for her in her journey toward the freedom she was seeking. The confident laugh died on her lips like I had physically slapped her across the face. She had clearly expected tears, desperate begging, explosive anger, or some kind of dramatic scene that would paint her as the brave victim finally fleeing from an emotionally abusive tyrant. Instead, she got calm, gracious acceptance that made her look like exactly what she actually was, a cruel person publicly humiliating someone who had given her everything she could possibly want in life. The rest of that dinner was absolutely excruciating for everyone involved. People kept trying to make polite small talk while desperately avoiding acknowledging the massive elephant in the room that Victoria had just placed there. Victoria herself sat there visibly fuming, occasionally muttering under her breath about what a cold, emotionless bastard I was for not reacting the way she had expected. Brittany kept whispering in her ear, probably trying to help her strategize some kind of damage control for a plan that had clearly gone off the rails. Other couples at nearby tables began excusing themselves early with transparently fake excuses about babysitters and early morning meetings, clearly desperate to escape the uncomfortable atmosphere. The car ride home was when Victoria finally exploded with the full fury of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan had completely backfired. She started demanding to know why I hadn't reacted properly to her announcement, why I wasn't fighting for our marriage the way a real husband should, and why I was being such a robot about everything instead of showing some actual human emotion. I calmly explained to her that she had just announced our divorce to a room full of 60 people, and I was simply respecting the decision she had made so publicly. This response made her even more furious than my initial reaction had. She started screeching about how I was supposed to fight for her, how real men don't just give up when their wives express unhappiness, and how my calm response proved that I had never really loved her in the first place. She slammed into the guest bedroom that night after dramatically dragging 3 large suitcases worth of clothes and toiletries with her, making absolutely sure to bang every door and drawer as loudly as possible to express her displeasure with how the evening had unfolded. I carefully exported the Ring doorbell footage of her dramatically leaving the house at 2 o'clock in the morning, mascara running down her face in black streaks as she loaded her Mercedes with an impressive amount of luggage for someone who was supposedly making a spontaneous decision. I sent the video file to Connor with a subject line that simply said, "Show time." our agreed-upon signal that Victoria had finally initiated the divorce proceedings we had been waiting for. The next morning, I was up at 5 a.m. just like every other day, hit the gym for my usual workout, showered, and was sitting in my office by 7 a.m. ready to begin what I knew would be a very interesting day. Before leaving the house, I had carefully packed all of Victoria's remaining belongings into boxes, taking detailed photographs of every single item for documentation purposes. The final count was 42 boxes total, including enough designer shoes to stock a small boutique and enough handbags to represent the down payment on a decent car. I even took the time to bubble wrap her extensive collection of designer sunglasses, with each pair carefully labeled with the receipt showing exactly what I had paid for it originally. By 9 a.m., Connor had filed our legal response and successfully obtained emergency court orders to freeze all of our joint accounts, exactly as the prenuptial agreement terms specified. By noon, Victoria had hired Gregory Walsh, one of those billboard lawyers who runs television commercials promising to fight for what you deserve and get you everything you're entitled to. His opening demand letter was so completely absurd and disconnected from reality that Connor actually had it professionally framed for his office wall as a conversation piece. The demands Gregory Walsh submitted included 50% of all assets, both personal and business, complete ownership of our 7-bedroom house, lifetime alimony payments of $48,000 per month, both Mercedes vehicles that were registered in my name, continuation of all credit cards and shopping accounts at my expense, and a $2.5 million lump sum payment for what they claimed were emotional damages caused by my supposed financial abuse during our marriage. Connor's response was an absolute masterclass in legal brevity and precision. He simply directed Mr. Walsh to carefully review sections 3.2 through 3.7 of the prenuptial agreement that both parties had signed, and requested that he submit a revised proposal that actually acknowledged the binding legal terms that his client had voluntarily agreed to when she married me. That's when Victoria's carefully constructed world started crumbling around her, and the real fireworks began in earnest. My phone became an absolute battlefield of missed calls and increasingly unhinged text messages that grew more desperate and threatening with each passing hour. After receiving the 18th text message calling me various creative names and making wild threats about what she was going to do to me, I blocked her number entirely and directed all future communication to go through our respective legal counsel. Her mother, Patricia, called next, and at 63 years old, she proved to be an even bigger gold digger than her daughter had ever been. Patricia started screaming at me about how prenuptial agreements weren't worth the paper they were printed on, how I was leaving her precious baby completely destitute, and how she was going to make sure that everyone in our social circle knew exactly what kind of heartless monster I really was. When I calmly explained to her that Victoria would actually receive approximately $3.1 million under the terms of the prenup, hardly what anyone would consider destitute by any reasonable measure, Patricia actually had the audacity to say that amount wasn't nearly enough to maintain the lifestyle that her daughter deserved to live. Then came what Connor liked to call the flying monkeys, a coordinated assault of people who had been recruited to fight Victoria's battles for her. Brittany called pretending she wanted to mediate the situation, but really just fishing for information about my legal strategy and what evidence I might have against Victoria. Nicole, Victoria's sister, left multiple tearful voicemails about family values, the importance of second chances, and how disappointed she was in my unwillingness to work things out. Random wives from the country club started texting me about how disappointed they were in my behavior and how they couldn't believe I was being so cruel to someone they considered a friend. Even the woman who did Victoria's hair extensions called to express her disbelief that I could be so heartless. But the real escalation came when Gregory Walsh actually took the time to thoroughly read the prenuptial agreement and had to sit down with his client to explain the harsh reality of her legal situation. Connor was able to get inside information about that meeting through his paralegal, who had connections in Walsh's office. Apparently, Victoria threw a heavy glass paperweight through Walsh's office window when he explained that the prenup was completely ironclad and legally bulletproof, and that her behavior at the charity gala constituted clear initiation of divorce proceedings without any legitimate cause. Week 2 of this legal battle was when Victoria and her team decided to pull out all the stops and go completely scorched earth in their approach. Someone called my biggest client claiming that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous, suggesting that they should seriously reconsider their ongoing contract with my company. Fortunately, I had been working with this client for 9 years and had built a relationship based on trust and consistently excellent work. They actually called me directly to laugh about the ridiculous attempt to sabotage my business and to assure me that it had no impact on our professional relationship whatsoever. Then came the social media assault campaign that Victoria launched with the dedication of a full-time job. She started posting multiple videos daily about surviving financial abuse and escaping from a narcissistic marriage, complete with crying selfies and inspirational quotes about knowing your worth and refusing to settle for less than you deserve. She attempted to transfer $155,000 from our investment account, apparently not realizing that I had already successfully frozen everything through the court system. The bank manager actually called me personally to share a laugh about someone trying to empty a legally frozen account, which he found both amusing and pathetic. Then, Victoria showed up at my office with Patricia, Brittany, and Nicole in tow, like some kind of desperate intervention brigade that had been assembled to intimidate me into submission. They started screaming about ownership and rights, making wild claims about what Victoria was entitled to and how I was stealing from her by enforcing the prenup. The scene became so disruptive and threatening that my office security had to escort them off the premises while my assistant filmed the entire encounter for evidence purposes. The false reports started rolling in like a coordinated military attack designed to overwhelm me from multiple directions simultaneously. The health department received anonymous tips about supposed safety violations at my construction sites, forcing me to waste time and money addressing completely fabricated complaints. The IRS got detailed reports claiming I was engaged in systematic tax evasion, triggering an audit that required extensive documentation and legal fees to resolve. Adult Protective Services was contacted with reports that I was somehow abusing Patricia, despite the fact that she lived 3 states away and I hadn't seen her in over a year. The Better Business Bureau received complaints from supposed customers we had never had about services we didn't even provide, each one requiring time and resources to investigate and disprove. Every single one of these false reports required significant time and money to address properly, but every single one also got meticulously documented by Connor as evidence for our growing countersuit for harassment and abuse of legal process. Each fraudulent report added another layer to the case we were building against Victoria, demonstrating a clear pattern of malicious behavior designed to destroy my business and reputation. But week 3 was when everything went completely nuclear, and the situation escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Gregory Walsh finally received the comprehensive forensic accounting report that Thompson had prepared, showing the systematic theft of $420,000 over a 2-year period through dozens of different methods. But the financial theft, as devastating as it was, turned out to be only the tip of the iceberg in terms of Victoria's criminal behavior. What was actually worse than the theft was the extensive tax fraud that the investigation had uncovered. Victoria had been claiming her personal shopping expenses as legitimate business deductions for her joke of a lifestyle blog for 3 consecutive years. She had been writing off Hermes handbags as content creation materials for her social media posts. Spa treatments and beauty appointments were being deducted as business meetings with potential sponsors and collaborators. She had even claimed her personal trainer and nutritionist as business expenses, arguing that maintaining her appearance was essential for her brand. 3 full years of completely fraudulent tax returns had put Victoria squarely in federal criminal offense territory, with potential penalties that could include significant prison time in addition to massive financial penalties. The IRS doesn't take kindly to people who systematically defraud the government, especially when the amounts involved reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Connor set up a meeting with Gregory Walsh to discuss these devastating findings, with the agreement that only the lawyers would attend and no clients would be present. Connor legally recorded the entire conversation, and the transformation in Walsh's demeanor was immediately obvious. Walsh walked into that meeting looking like he had aged a full decade in just 3 weeks of representing Victoria. He slumped into his chair like a man who had been completely defeated and knew he was fighting an unwinnable battle. The conversation was brief, brutal, and absolutely decisive. Connor laid out the evidence of systematic theft and tax fraud in clinical detail, then presented Walsh with a simple choice for his client. Victoria could either walk away from the marriage with absolutely nothing, and we would handle the theft issues internally without involving criminal prosecutors, or we would pursue full criminal charges for the theft and turn over all the tax fraud evidence to the IRS for federal prosecution. Walsh left that meeting and drove straight to Victoria's secret downtown condo, according to the doorman who Thompson had befriended during his surveillance operation. There was screaming that could be heard through the walls for over 2 hours. followed by Walsh leaving the building looking like he had gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson and lost every single one of them. That night, the desperate begging began in earnest for the first time since this whole ordeal had started. First, Patricia called me actually crying real tears for once in her life, pleading for mercy and claiming that Victoria had simply made some mistakes but didn't deserve to have her entire life completely destroyed. When I pointed out that Victoria had systematically destroyed her own life through deliberate theft and fraud over multiple years, Patricia tried switching tactics and started negotiating, asking what it would take to make all of this just go away quietly. Then Brittany's husband Kevin called trying to broker some kind of deal between Victoria and me, approaching the situation like a diplomatic negotiation between two warring countries. Eventually, Kevin admitted the real reason he was so motivated to help resolve this situation quickly and quietly. Brittany had been doing exactly the same type of tax fraud that Victoria had been caught doing, and they were now terrified that the scrutiny and investigation would spread to their entire friend group, exposing a whole network of wealthy wives who had been systematically defrauding the government. Finally, last week, Victoria called me from a blocked number in what Connor had approved as one final conversation, provided that I recorded every word of it for legal purposes. The confident, laughing woman who had announced our divorce to 60 people at a charity gala was completely gone, replaced by someone who sounded desperate, broken, and utterly defeated by the consequences of her own actions. Victoria sobbed through barely coherent apologies, blaming Brittany entirely for being a bad influence and leading her astray from the person she claimed she really was. She insisted that she had never meant any of it, that she had been manipulated and pressured into making terrible decisions that didn't represent her true character. She begged me to call off the IRS investigation, promising that she would pay back every penny she had stolen if I would just show mercy and give her a chance to make things right. She actually told me through her tears that she was literally on her knees, that she would do absolutely anything I asked of her, and that she would sign whatever legal documents I wanted and disappear from my life forever if I would just show her the mercy she didn't deserve but desperately needed. Her voice was shaking with genuine terror as she described the federal prison time she was potentially facing and how her entire life had been destroyed by her own greed and stupidity. I calmly reminded her that she had wanted freedom from our marriage, that she had announced that desire while laughing in front of 60 people at a public event. I pointed out that she had systematically stolen from me for years and had tried to destroy my business and reputation out of pure spite. Her response was more desperate sobbing and increasingly frantic begging until I finally ended the call, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and genuine pity for what she had done to herself. The divorce was finalized yesterday in what Connor claims was the fastest resolution he had ever seen in his entire legal career. When someone is looking at potential federal criminal charges, they tend to sign legal papers very quickly and without much negotiation. The final settlement was exactly what the prenuptial agreement had dictated for cases involving theft and fraud. Absolutely nothing. Victoria received no money, no assets, no alimony, and no claims to anything we had accumulated during our marriage. She even had to pay her own substantial legal fees, which had mounted into the tens of thousands of dollars during the brief but intense legal battle. In exchange for this complete forfeiture of any marital claims, we agreed not to pursue the theft charges through criminal prosecution, though the IRS situation remains entirely her problem to solve on her own. The poetic justice of how this entire situation has unfolded is almost Shakespearean in its perfect irony. The secret condo she had been paying for with money stolen from me became crucial evidence in the tax fraud investigation, demonstrating a clear pattern of using fraudulently obtained funds for personal benefit. She was evicted from that apartment last week when she could no longer afford the rent without access to my money. The Mercedes she had been driving was actually leased through my company's business accounts, and it was repossessed just 2 days after our divorce was finalized. All of her credit cards, which had been tied to my accounts and creditworthiness, were immediately canceled, leaving her with no access to the financial lifestyle she had become accustomed to. Her designer wardrobe, purchased entirely with funds that were later determined to be stolen, is now subject to seizure by the IRS as part of their investigation into her fraudulent tax returns. As of today, based on what I'm hearing through various sources in our former social circle, Victoria is living with her mother Patricia in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a decidedly non-luxury complex that's about as far from her previous lifestyle as you could possibly imagine. She's working at Nordstrom in the handbag department, which feels like the universe has developed a twisted sense of humor about her situation. The woman who used to casually spend $32,000 on a random Tuesday is now taking the bus to work every day because she can't afford to buy, lease, or finance a car. Brittany won't return any of Victoria's phone calls because she's far too busy dealing with her own IRS audit that was triggered by the investigation into Victoria's fraudulent tax returns. The entire friend group that used to revolve around their coordinated gold-digging activities has completely ghosted Victoria, like she has some kind of contagious disease that might spread to them if they maintain any contact. Victoria currently owes approximately $215,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest to the federal government. She has no savings, no assets, and no wealthy husband to pay for everything anymore. Her Instagram account has been completely deleted, along with all traces of her ridiculous lifestyle blog that claimed she was some kind of entrepreneur. The woman who used to spend more on a single handbag than most people make in a month now makes $13 an hour plus commission, selling purses she could never afford to women who are living the exact life she used to have. Someone sent me a photograph last night from an unknown number, and I have no idea who took it or how they got my contact information. The image showed Victoria at her Nordstrom job wearing the standard employee uniform, looking completely dead inside while ringing up a $5,500 designer handbag for a customer who was probably living the lifestyle Victoria used to enjoy. The message that came with the photo simply said, "Thought you'd want to see what freedom looks like." I don't know who this satisfied customer was, but I'm definitely having that photograph professionally framed for my office wall. As for me, life has never been better than it is right now. My business is absolutely booming, with all those contracts that Victoria tried to sabotage renewed for multiple years with even better terms than before. I'm currently dating a veterinarian named Sarah who thinks spending more than $60 on a purse is completely insane and considers Olive Garden to be fancy dining. We're planning a camping trip next month, something that Victoria used to call disgusting poor people activities whenever I suggested we try something outdoors and adventurous. It turns out that when you remove a financial and emotional parasite from your life, everything else becomes dramatically healthier and more enjoyable. Sarah and I actually have conversations about things other than money, shopping, and social status. She's genuinely interested in my work and asks thoughtful questions about the projects I'm building. When she says she loves me, I know it's because of who I am as a person, not because of what I can buy for her. To all the men who might be reading this story, let me be crystal clear about something that could save your financial life. Get the prenuptial agreement no matter what. I don't care if she cries for a week straight. I don't care if her mother calls you Satan himself and threatens to ruin your reputation. I don't care if she threatens to leave you at the altar and cancel the wedding. If the woman you're planning to marry won't sign a prenup, then she doesn't actually love you. She loves your wallet, your bank account, and your earning potential. If she truly loves you as a person and wants to spend her life with you regardless of money, then signing a piece of paper that says she won't take your assets if she decides to leave shouldn't be a problem for her. A woman who genuinely loves you will understand that you're protecting something you built before you met her, and she'll respect your need to be cautious after seeing what divorce has done to other men. To Victoria, if you're somehow reading this story from your mother's cramped apartment on that $80 Android phone you had to finance because your credit is destroyed, I want you to know something important. You got exactly what you wanted from our marriage. You're finally free from what you called the emotional imprisonment of being married to me. You're free from the golden cage you claimed I kept you trapped in. You're free to live your authentic life without my money enabling your ridiculous lifestyle. You're free to take public transportation to your minimum wage job every single day. You're free to work in retail, selling luxury items to women who can actually afford them while you count pennies to make rent. You're free to explain to the IRS investigators where all that money went and why you thought you could defraud the federal government without consequences. Every single time you clock in for your shift at Nordstrom, I want you to remember that you announced our divorce while laughing at a charity gala in front of 60 people. Every time you have to take the bus because you can't afford a car, I want you to remember that you chose this path when you decided to steal from me and plan your elaborate exit strategy. Every time you ring up a handbag that costs more than your monthly rent, I want you to remember what you had and what you threw away because of your greed and sense of entitlement. Every single day for the rest of your life, you get to live with the direct consequences of the choices you made. You get to experience what real freedom actually looks like when it's not subsidized by someone else's hard work and success. That's the authentic life you claimed you wanted so desperately, working for every dollar, budgeting for basic necessities, and facing the reality that your beauty and charm can't pay your bills when you don't have a wealthy husband to manipulate. You spent years systematically planning to financially destroy me, stealing my money to fund your secret escape plan, and trying to turn our divorce into your personal lottery ticket. You coordinated with your toxic friends to maximize the damage you could inflict on my business and reputation. You filed false reports with government agencies trying to destroy everything I had built from nothing. You thought you were so much smarter than me, so much more clever and manipulative than the simple construction guy you had married. But karma isn't just a word that people throw around when they want justice. It's a patient, methodical accountant who never makes mistakes and always collects exactly what's owed. Karma spent years documenting every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every manipulation you attempted. And when the time came for payment, karma didn't negotiate, didn't show mercy, and didn't accept partial payment. You got to experience firsthand what happens when someone who has built everything from nothing decides to protect what they've created. You learned that prenuptial agreements aren't just suggestions when they're properly written and legally enforced. You discovered that theft is still theft even when you're married to your victim, and that the IRS doesn't care about your sob story when you've been systematically defrauding them for years. The most beautiful part of this entire situation is that I didn't have to destroy you. You destroyed yourself with your own greed, dishonesty, and sense of entitlement. Every single consequence you're facing now is the direct result of choices you made freely and deliberately. I just had to be patient enough to let you finish building the case against yourself and smart enough to document everything properly. So enjoy your freedom, Victoria. Enjoy your authentic life as a retail worker living with your mother. Enjoy taking the bus to work and explaining to customers why they should buy handbags you'll never be able to afford again. Enjoy your independence from the terrible burden of being married to someone who gave you everything you ever claimed to want. This is what you chose. This is what you fought for. This is what you announced laughingly to a room full of people who are probably still talking about that night and wondering how someone could be so monumentally stupid. And remember, every single day when you wake up in that cramped apartment and face another shift selling luxury items to women living the life you used to have, that you could have had everything forever if you had just been grateful for what you had instead of scheming to take even more. Karma never forgets, and karma always collects.